Hey folks, this is Amira Armond from Curie Solutions. We are starting our webinar today, which is the review of the Federal Acquisition Regulation proposed CUI rule. And this has been a long time coming, so it's pretty exciting. My fellow speakers are all lead certified CMMC assessors and very experienced consultants who've been helping clients get ready. So we have Wellen, Logan Therrien, myself, and Jonathan Weadon. Thank you guys for joining us. And bear with me for a second. This will be the only salesy bit. So this webinar is put on by Curie Solutions, which is an authorized CMMC third-party assessment organization. We do this topic. We do cybersecurity for defense contractors. We do cybersecurity for federal contractors. And we're very deep in the regulations for controlled and classified information and CMMC. We've got ways to assist companies in becoming compliant and passing. And we've got a very good track record. I think we're at past 10 companies that have been third-party assessed and passed. And then we also perform assessments ourselves. So if you are interested in getting help or you need a high-quality assessment, give us a ring. All right. So for the rest of this webinar, we're going to be reviewing the Federal Acquisition Regulation for Controlled and Classified Information. If you want to look it up yourself, you can look up FAR Case 2017-016 or go to this link, and we will plan to make this slide deck available. So don't worry about that. All right. So first topic is setting the scene. What is this thing that we're talking about? Right? Why is this important to contractors? Okay, so first, we're talking about this thing called controlled and classified information, which is a superset of data which has at least one law, regulation, or government-wide directive that says this type of data needs to be safeguarded, meaning it needs to be kept in a locked room or on a secure information system, something like that. Or the data requires dissemination controls, meaning don't just share it with anybody. It needs to be only shared for a lawful government purpose, or even more restricted than that. So in the past, federal agencies were required to protect the confidentiality of CUI at a moderate level. And that actually is a government-wide policy that says all federal agencies, this stuff called CUI, we need to make sure that it does not get stolen. Confidentiality. But we're not going to go crazy, right? We're not going to go super high levels on it. We're not going to treat it like it's top secret data. We're going to do moderate level of security for it, okay? Now, those federal agencies were then supposed to tell their contractors to do the same thing. And then from the contractors to the subcontractors, right? And thus, that would be how the federal government and all of the people working for the federal government are supposed to protect CUI. But up until this FAR CUI rule came out, there really hasn't been any standardization of communication to contractors that, hey, you contractors, you need to protect CUI too. The federal agencies got that communication, but they didn't tell anyone else. The one exception was the Department of Defense, who's been, for a good reason, very concerned with protecting CUI and related to national defense. Now, here's a quick timeline. This is a super quick and dirty timeline, but the idea is to kind of give you a frame of reference of the efforts that the government has gone through in terms of protecting data, specifically CUI. Okay, so back in the past, probably one of the very first would be nuclear data. The government said, we should protect this data. We should make sure that not everyone can see this, right? We're not going to classify it, but it's a different category than regular unclassified data. And they also came up with other stuff, right? So, contractors, if you're going to give us bids, we're going to treat those confidentially. Hey, weapons data, we want to protect that so it doesn't get exported. Oh, by the way, there's this protected health stuff. We should protect that too. Oh, PII should be protected. Now, each of these different categories, as the government decided that they should protect it, they wrote a rule or a regulation or a policy saying we need to protect this type of data. And it happened over years, right? All these different little individual types of data were individually designated to be protected with that safeguarding or that dissemination control. Now, September 11th occurred. Most of us remember that. That was a rough day for the United States. And there was a commission to try and investigate how terrorists could have attacked the United States and been successful. And out of that commission, there was a report that said one of the causational items was that we had our different national defense organizations tracking terrorist activity and tracking this group and that group, and they all knew that something was happening, but they didn't talk to each other because they're afraid that the other agency in the government would not secure the data appropriately. And so information sharing did not happen because the agencies didn't trust each other. And ironically, when we got the executive order, I believe it was during Obama's term, regarding CUI, saying, let's make a CUI program. The executive order was actually along the lines of, we need to standardize this information so that federal agencies can share it, so that they know that they shouldn't take this data and consider it top secret, so that we can communicate better. Okay, so we had a presidential directive saying there's this thing called CUI, and we're going to standardize it, and we're going to be able to share it and work with it. Now, before that point, and going on for quite a while, in the federal government, anytime the government didn't want to share stuff with the public, and that's not the official definition, but I worked, as a contractor for the government during this period, and it absolutely, the way I handled it was, if I don't want this to be potentially put on a newspaper later, we put that for official use only marking on something, right? And that could be because it was potentially sensitive, or embarrassing, or who knows, right? So that became the standard marking for lots of stuff. But when we got the CUI program, where the National Archives became in charge of it, Information Security Oversight Office is the sub-team, and we had the 32nd Code of Federal Regulation, Part 2002, which is basically, lots of pages of legalese that say how the government's going to protect CUI. We started coming up with this standardized CUI markings and potentially telling people, hey, protect the CUI. All right, now that didn't really do anything to contractors, right? All of this contractors weren't necessarily paying attention. The first major thing where contractors started having to pay attention is when the Department of Defense started putting in contract clauses saying, protect your CUI and let us know if you have any trouble doing so. And that was the DFARS 252-204-7012 clause. At that time, the Department of Defense also defined a type of information called controlled technical information. And they said that should be protected too. And that's one of the biggest groups of data that defense contractors have to deal with now. Okay. Now, after a few years, the Defense Department looked back and they went, why are we still losing data? We just developed this super fighter jet. Why did a different country develop something that looks just like it? What could have possibly happened? Is it because the bad guy stole the data from the federal agency? Or is it because the bad guy stole the data from contractors? And they go, no, it can't possibly be contractors because we told them several years ago to do cybersecurity. So the DoD did a couple little audits. They investigated a couple contractors at random, and they found out that they weren't doing security. They were doing some of it, but not much of it. And so the Department of Defense said, well, if you're going to say that you're doing cybersecurity, but you're not going to actually do it, then we're going to have to do something which introduces third-party assurance. Right, and that's how we got the CMMC program, the Cybersecurity Maturity Model program, which is, what I do, what Logan does. This is what all of us do. And now we're coming up to now. The Department of Defense is starting to add that contract clause, potentially to contracts. I think they're probably within 6 months of really starting to enforce it, which is great for the DoD. But now we've got the FAR CUI rule, which applies to all federal contractors. It's proposed, right? So it's not in effect yet. It might change. But this rule is essentially what the DoD did back in 2017. Okay, but we'll go into the differences. So let me start opening up the floor to my fellow presenters. And the first topic is, federal contractors have to understand what CUI that they're encountering, what they're generating. And they also need to notify their customer, whichever agency it is, if CUI is potentially mismarked or unmarked. And then also federal contractors have to protect that data. So let me call on that first. What's the details? Where are your thoughts?
So I really like the fact they're going to have a form that lists out every single category of CUI that'll be generated on the contract. I think that's the one thing that's drastically missing. A lot of times it's left up to an organization to figure out what category CUI is in. And ultimately, we're protecting the government's data, so it's their job to let us know what we should be encountering during the execution of the contract. So I think, honestly, the form is something I think is excellent. Now, of course, there's a lot of other details on that form, but I think one of the critical aspects that actually lists out the categories.
Thank you, Thad. Logan?
Certainly. I have feelings about this. So this is being expanded, at least I see CUI. So I'm telling my experience with the clients that I work with. One of the biggest frustrations that happen at the very beginning is identifying what CUI they have, because not having that down, having a solid understanding of what's in your environment, there's two risks, right? One is the risk is that I'm spending money that I don't need to spend protecting data that's not there. The other risk is that I'm not protecting the data that I have. And the identification of that information in their environment is one of the biggest struggles I've seen with all Department of Defense contractors that deal with this currently, because of the way they get that information. They're probably getting information through contracting teams that may not understand what cybersecurity is, right? They just know that they have a piece of paper, they got to get it paid for, funded in place, and then have somebody take charge of it, right? But having that line of communication between a program manager at a prime, through the contracting team, through another contracting team, and then to another programming management office, that data is typically lost. And it's done in multiple ways, either just that breaking communication, but there's some of the larger organizations, those primes, don't have a clear-cut way of identifying that information into the contracts. I've seen it so expansive that they just say, refer to this page to understand which are applicable to you, which clauses, FAR or DFARS, right? And that page may list every clause. And it doesn't go beyond that of why do I need to pick that? Why do I have this? In a lot of cases, they identify I don't have that information in my environment. I shouldn't have hired those people to do this. I shouldn't have had, I shouldn't have taken these precautions because it's not applicable. So that's the danger. And this form does a really good job of identifying the name, the marking, which is the next step of going to that NARA database to figure out which laws are applicable to the information that you have in your environment now.
And we're all super geeky, and we've been looking at this rule for a while. So I'm going to pull back a little bit and kind of give some context. So the proposed regulation for all federal contractors includes a form template, which says essentially we're going to be sharing CUI with you as a contractor. Here's the types of CUI. Here's point of contact information, potentially a little bit on how to recognize it, and more detail like that. And it's a standard form, which would be included in every contract that has a CUI requirement. So this is a big difference between what the Department of Defense did in the past and this rule, where the Department of Defense just said, if you happen to have CUI, you need to do all this protection, but good luck figuring it out. And with this rule, the contract officer is actually given the first responsibility to tell the contractor in a detailed way, you will be receiving CUI. Get ready. Make sure you include this in your bid. All right, John, you're next.
Wonderful. In regards to the form, I like that it comes early. It is included in solicitation and contracts. So even very early on in the process, you understand exactly what CUI would be involved. It'll help the contractor be able to decide whether or not they would be in a place to accept that bid, since they have to be prepared to handle that data at the time of acceptance. Also, I don't know if we were going to get into this later, there's also the passing down to a subcontractor, wherein the expectation is that the contractor will then modify or rewrite the SF, the standard form, and pass it down to the subcontractors beneath them. There's, in the area where they talk about the expected costs of the regulation, they even outline an expectation that some 500,000 of these forms will be created by contractors, expecting each form to take about 2 hours, which seems relatively reasonable once you've done it twice or 3 times, I suppose.
So in the early days of CUI, I performed as a sub of a sub of a sub on a few contracts, and I remember getting pulled in and being given sensitive information, not secret, not top secret, but stuff that I probably shouldn't have been handed as a subcontractor. Unless I had very strong CUI protections in place. And this was after the DFARS rule came out, but before CMMC. And I think that having that form going out to all the subs is hopefully going to help make it very clear which ones need to be ready to receive and protect CUI. Now, this next point, I don't know if anybody really mentioned it, but there is a requirement in this proposed rule that says if you get a document, if you get information that looks like it should be CUI, looks pretty serious, but it's not marked, you have to notify the next person up the chain or the federal agency within a very short amount of time. I think it might be 8 hours. Yeah, everyone's nodding. So 8 hours. And then on top of that, you have to protect it like it is CUI. And that's definitely a point of heartburn for contractors because according to other regulations that pre-existed this one, the person who creates that information is on the hook for deciding whether it's CUI. And it's generally not other people's jobs to second guess the creator, right? If federal government sends you something and they don't consider it CUI, are you going to throw a wrench into all your processes and say, oh, I think this should be secure, right? Well, there already was supposed to be an expert involved, but they're putting this in to protect the data, I guess, right? But on the flip side, it's also setting up a situation where maybe you were not prepared to protect that data because you weren't told that it's supposed to be secure, and now you're suddenly supposed to do it without warning. Does anyone have a thought on that one?
So I will say, if you look back at the original 32 CFR Part 2002, there's actually statements in there that says if CUI isn't properly marked, then you're supposed to notify the agency the CUI belongs to, and even takes it a step further and says if things that are marked with CUI labels that aren't CUI, that's a reportable incident as well. That's supposed to be reported to the agency. So there is the basis of the original CUI rule that does kind of allude to the fact that this is something that should be identified. But to your point, are contractors going to second guess the government if the government says it's not CUI or it is CUI? I don't know. That's a tough one.
So I have thoughts on this too, and exactly that the 32 CFR Part 2002, it does state it's kind of muddy in the fact that that for marking, right, you don't have the authority to change the marking, especially for legacy material, which is some cases may be considered CUI under new documentation. But it's still it's like a sub paragraph that says you're still responsible for handling it appropriately and then informing up. But the problem is that is the 32 CFR. It's another document that's it probably who's reading it, right? And this, I think one of the great things about this form is it gets it into somebody's hands. It gives them the awareness that this exists. And so that's important, is that a lot of this form and for things that we're going to discuss here in a minute too, it raises awareness for people who are actively associated with it. But I do think, the potentially mismarked, again, why is that important? Because you may have things that you can question. Is why does this say this bolt is CUI, right? I have 400,000 of those on my shelf and I sell them on Amazon, right? It says it's CUI, right? So it helps identify maybe a miscommunication that's happening between the contractor and the sub, or the prime and the KO.
The thing I don't like about the timeline, I'm actually kind of okay with that 8-hour timeline. What I don't like is that there's no timeline for the reply. Right? It doesn't say you have to get an answer within any amount of time. And I think that's terribly unfair. Okay.
Can I
Next
add to that?
topic. Oh, yeah.
Can I add to
Yeah.
that, Amir? I 100% agree with you on this too, and I think there's opportunity for this not going well with that reporting method. So in the DoD, if you have an incident, right, you have spillage, something where it shouldn't be, right, you have the opportunity to report that via DIBnet, right? There's a very solid method of reporting that. The way this is explained in the proposed rule is that you report it up to the contracting officer, right, who's probably not a cybersecurity expert, probably doesn't understand the risk associated with what they're hearing. Maybe they do, maybe they don't, but probably not. And then it also states in the proposed rule to go to the DIBnet website to look for guidance, right? It's kind of vague on what it says to do. So again, you have people that are contracting folks, most likely, that it's reporting this up, that now have to learn cybersecurity on the fly. And there's not a standardized structure for that report. So who knows what's going to go up and who knows what it's going to look like. And it's going to happen very quickly if it happens in accordance with the regulation.
So I just want to add something real quick. So I've been involved in probably 2 or 3 dozen incidents that reported to the DIBnet in the last 5 years. Not a single time has the contracting officer reached out to the organization that did the reporting. So I would like to see that there's something built into the process that if we take the effort to put it into, we properly report it because we have a requirement, that there's at least some acknowledgement that it gets received. Unfortunately, that's not happening right now. So I hope the government takes that and says, okay, you did your part, you reported it. Now we're going to do our part and say this is now been dealt with. We accept the fact that it's been reported. We accept the fact that this happened, and we move on with life. Or we want to do X, Y, and Z.
All right, folks. We got to move on. We got like 15 more slides at least. So, okay. Next requirement is that federal contractors will protect any CUI in their possession. According to a document by NIST, which is numbered 800-171, which the DoD contractors have already, they're hopefully well familiar with this. It's a lot. It's pretty advanced cybersecurity. It's a lot more than most companies do. It's kind of on par with financial institutions. And then also, if you use a cloud system, you have to use a system which is authorized through a federal program called FedRAMP, which is a very highly secure cloud system. Any comments on this requirement?
So I do it. It's basically back to the form. One thing I do appreciate about this form, and again, it's talking about expenditure of money when it's not required, is there's options on there. There's 3 options when it comes to how you're going to protect your CUI basic, and there's checkboxes, and one is that you're using a federal system, right? So how does that apply? Right, you get a contract, but you're going to be working as a contractor within the government provided system. So the second option is that you're going to be using a non-federal system with the 171 implemented as security protections, and then there's the third option if it's required that you have the 172 requirements. But again, I think that's a way to effectively manage. Do I need to now build an environment and protect that environment just to get this contract that I will never actually process, store, or transmit that information outside of the government network? I think that's valuable.
Very good point. And just to follow up on what Logan mentioned, so there's a second publication called 800-172, which has even more stringent cybersecurity requirements. And that would be used for only the most high security CUI. So this federal acquisition rule that's proposed does have the capability of saying, yeah, most CUI needs to be protected at this level, but some CUI needs to be an even higher level, which we really haven't seen that rolled out to anyone. Even the DoD hasn't pushed that out yet. All right, next. Federal contractors shall notify an agency point of contact or their next higher contracting tier if there is a CUI incident, probably and/or, and then also cooperate during the investigations of the incident. So this cooperation would mean that if you have a system that got hacked, you're going to forensically preserve that system and make it available to the government to investigate, as an example. Any thoughts on that? This one has a timeline too, doesn't it?
Yeah, this one's the 8-hour rule as well. And the thing that I don't like about what's in the proposed rules, it says suspected incidents. The fact that you're trying to figure out if something's an incident, and then you got to take valuable time on determining whether something's an actual incident instead of an event, and then report it. I mean, honestly, if this was done properly, every time you get an alert, that would be a suspected incident. You'd literally be in there reporting incidents on a daily basis. So I hope they clarify the language and they say confirmed incident versus suspected.
Yeah, agree. The suspected kills me because it takes sometimes more than 8 hours to figure out if there actually was an incident. That's a pretty quick timeline already. So again, now that's all getting flooded back through each client, each contractor, up to the KO of whatever, or for the government, all these suspected incidents, and they have to go quickly. So that tells me that the data is not going to be vetted well. It's just going to be shoved right up, and so how many more folks are we going to have to hire to manage that process? I don't know. I don't think it's going to work well.
One consideration as a contractor, we don't necessarily think about it before there's an incident. But when there's an incident and contractors start thinking, wow, I need to notify the government. Now it's, what is the government going to do to me? What happens if the government discovered that I failed to patch a system or I didn't have my firewalls set as strongly as they should have? Are they going to be looking at me to help me, or are they going to be looking at me to prosecute me? And I can say that most of the time I've talked to somebody who's reported an incident, it's been a very positive experience where the government did come in to help them. But it is always a real concern, and generally lawyers get called in for advice. And that 8-hour timeline, it's a little bit tricky to do all that, trying to figure out what's going on in that situation. It's a lot.
Can I add something to that, Amir?
Yeah.
So I don't feel like I'm just griping the whole time. I do have a recommendation as well. Is that you have a process as a company if this stays in there as 8 hours, because it doesn't talk about. I didn't read anything about penalties, but there probably will be if you don't do this. So having an established framework of what to evaluate and how to report that within your company and outside. When we get into the CMMC program, that's pretty well vetted. But having it in accordance with the 171 requirements, just having that really ironed out so that if it does happen, you don't have to figure it out on the fly.
And sorry, I didn't mean to.
Go ahead. Go ahead, John.
In support of that, that SF form that we harped on for 20 minutes earlier has a section wherein it identifies who you're supposed to contact in the case of a CUI incident. So if you have all of your SF forms from your contracts in one place, that can be a reference point as part of your procedure for contacting people. Yeah, that's it.
That's actually, yeah, again, they did a lot of useful things, right? They did incorporate some major lessons learned. So that is nice. Okay. Next requirement is the contractor agrees to allow the government to come to them to see if they are being compliant. Meaning, so with the Department of Defense, what we've seen is the DoD has an entire cybersecurity assessment wing under their Defense Contract Management Agency. And they're basically government auditors for cybersecurity. They come in, they review whether a company is, whether they have firewalls turned on and whether they're patching and whether multi-factor authentication is turned on. And they're looking for problems. They're looking for situations where the contractor said, oh yeah, I'm doing all the cybersecurity, and then they're not, but they're billing for it. It's a very standard audit and accountability action that the government does just for cybersecurity. So it sounds like this FAR rule would expand that program, or maybe each agency would build their own little wing, or maybe it would be run by Department of Justice, where they're going to come out and randomly sample contractors, or maybe they'll get a little tip and they'll go visit specific ones, with the threat of a False Claims Act prosecution if that contractor is not doing what they said they would do. Any thoughts?
Just a value of appreciation for the form again, that there's actually levels that are specified on what is going to be expected of the contractor that this standard form is flowed down to. The options again are that the documentation can be reviewed by the contracting team prior to the award, or supporting document after the award, or the larger requirement of access to the on-site to evaluate the requirements, the security requirements. So I do think that's another good thing about this form.
So Thad, go ahead.
So I was actually, I didn't even catch that fact that this was a requirement that the government was going to do the inspections. I missed that piece. So thank you. I'm just curious how large that organization would have to be able to do that. If there's anywhere between 200,000 or 80,000 is what the government says, but I think it's more like 250,000 to support the DoD. How many contractors are supporting the federal government? It's got to be close to 500,000. I'm just curious how large that organization would have to be able to assess. Just a thought.
Well, that's right, and that brings up, of course, I'm not sure. There are going to be contractors who are tempted to read this, sign on the bottom line, but not do the cybersecurity. And the question is, will I get caught? Right? Especially if you don't report cyber incidents, especially if you don't complain that you have mismarked CUI. I'm in the business of trying to make sure that we do have a very secure infrastructure on the United States side, so that we win the next war, right? So we don't start losing wars. But we saw with the Department of Defense, they essentially did this rule back in 2017, 8 years, 6, oh my goodness, 8 years ago, right? And what happened is the contractors, they just have somebody sign that they would do it, but they didn't raise their price at all. And now when the DoD says, no, we really do want to make sure that you're doing it, there's a massive amount of complaining, for better or for worse, right? A lot of people saying, whoa, I'm going to go bankrupt if I do all this cybersecurity that I said I've been doing this entire time, right? But it's so expensive, and I don't feel like I can raise my prices, because I said I've been doing it this entire time. So the threat of, having an inspector come in to verify you're being compliant, we might just see the same thing where a bunch of companies say they're good. The government can't verify them all. Maybe they're going to verify what, 1 in 10,000 per year, right? And if you are unlucky, you get selected. Sucks to be you, but if you're the other, 9,999, you just keep winning contracts. Anyways, towards the end, I'll probably say this again, but I'm one of the biggest lessons learned from the DoD is that self-attestation doesn't work, and I'm curious how this rule is going to incorporate that. All right, next. Federal contractors shall flow down requirements to their subcontractors and subs of subs. What thoughts do you guys have?
This goes back to the importance of having that label on the form and understanding what the information is from the program managers inside that contracting team or that contractor organization. Because the dangers that we see a lot are that they did CUI. All right, let's pass that. We need somebody to help us build it. All right, now you got CUI too, and you have CUI too, and you have CUI. But in reality, what you did was you purchased some bolts, you ordered some transistors, you got some tires, right, and they weren't actually CUI. But you've put this obligation for protecting this information that you told them was CUI to those subs, and now they're spending money, increasing cost. And a lot of those costs go back onto the contractor, sure, but back on the American taxpayer. So the requirement to flow down these requirements to subcontractors is important, and having that identification, that standard form is just super helpful.
I have a question. Does the language make it sound like the prime is going to be on the hook if they hire a sub who is not actually doing it? Or is it like with DoD right now, the primes are going to have to verify that their subs have been doing the cybersecurity as part of the CMMC program. But before that point, with the self-attestation, there really wasn't any verification at all, other than just did the subcontractor sign that they would do it, just like the prime sign that they would do it, and that was it. Do we see the same thing where it's just, oh, they signed, we're good, or do you think there's going to be any expectation of additional validation between the prime and the sub?
The most I see is that they're going to be including this clause, and then that they're going to notify the government once they're informed by their sub. So I don't know. I don't know if what method they use to validate those scores. It's already hard enough within the SPR system that the DoD uses. So I don't know how they would validate that unless it's promissory notes and attestations.
Yeah.
Yeah,
What do you think, Dad?
I think it's going to be what happens right now. So the primes, they send out all these questionnaires that lists out all these questions, and you answer yes or no, and that's what they take and they accept. They usually don't go beyond that. Just accept the questionnaire.
So just to follow up on what Logan mentioned, the DoD, in order for them to create a system where the primes can validate their subs, they had to make a huge database available where everybody can report, and attest their compliance and it's specific to an information system and a cage code. And then those cage codes are used during the contract negotiations to say who's going to be working on what, right? And so far, we haven't seen any indication that at a federal level, there'd be a database like that built up. So I guess there's just what mechanism would be used? We don't see a mechanism. It would just have to be, did they sign saying that they would do it? And that might be it, right? Yeah, okay. I'm very cynical. I'm sorry, guys.
Yeah, the danger is that there's just unknown subcontractors out there doing business and not being tracked at all.
Yeah, it's, I mean, in a lot of cases, even primes don't know who's, say, 3 levels deep. They know who they're talking to, but past that, they don't necessarily know. And that's a big question mark for everyone. All right, we're moving on to, yeah, sorry.
Go ahead. Well, I guess the only, a concern I would have is if there was a subcontractor that did not meet requirements or did fail to do something and they were, that contract was pulled and there was no database, there's potential for them to take their business to another contractor and do the same thing, right? So you could have repeat offenders out there not meeting the intent.
All right, we're moving on to our last section. So we've got specific discussion questions that I'm curious of our presenters' thoughts. And then we're going to dive into audience questions. So if you have a question or topic to bring up as an attendee, please throw it into chat. We've already got about 4 or 5. What sort of a cost, what sort of an effort should a federal contractor expect? They've managed to dodge CMMC. They're not a defense contractor. What does this FAR CUI rule mean to different types of companies?
I can give you the cost from page 12 of the proposed rule. Total estimated cost of compliance for small businesses the first year is about $1 million. Nope. I'm sorry. To small businesses as a whole, $937 million, with an estimated $564 million each additional year. I believe I'm reading that right. I don't know what the divider is there, but that's
what?
Yeah, that's on page 12. So I guess as a total cost, that's looking back into the funding of the U.S. government, which is paid for by the taxpayers. So it's not going to be cheap. It's just to hire the people to be knowledgeable, to do it right? Or do you have somebody you're going to hire internally? What is their paycheck versus getting a third party consultant in to help you put something in place? Are you going to be going on-prem? Are you going to be using a FedRAMP cloud service provider? Are you paying per license, right? What does that look like? I'm not sure how much. Does anybody have a reference point for what we're using for CMMC compliance? I can't imagine it would be much different for a small business. I usually see the large numbers, not the actual individual for companies.
Yeah. So I don't know how it compares to CMMC exactly, although I expect it's almost exactly the same thing since it's the same 800-171 revision 2 requirements. And I did all my pages, not by how many pages it is, but what page it is in the overall FAR clause. So I got these giant page numbers like 4284. It breaks it down by individual small business and other than small business, wherein small businesses had an expectation of $148,000 the first year and $98,000 every ongoing year. And then not small business, i.e. larger businesses, was $548,000 for the first year and $494,000 for each ongoing year. So like you say, big numbers. An expectation of increased cost. They outlined an expectation and the rise of procurement costs for the first year of the implementation of this program, it being $2.8 billion, with an ongoing increase of $1.7 billion going forward past that.
And even the numbers you put out there, Jonathan, that I don't think those are going to actually valid. So just to bring on somebody, are you bringing on an employee or hiring a third-party consultant to help you implement this? Then that price is blown out of the window, right? That is that one person support. That's not including your technical implementation. That's not including the hours for policy processes, the evaluation. Are you going to get somebody to come in and just assess your compliance? Those numbers are I don't think they work.
Yeah, there was
now,
a second. Oh, sorry.
Oh, go ahead. Well,
if you're going to have somebody, there was a separate
hat,
section where they talk about bringing people in as a possibility. Sorry, I'll be quiet now.
No, again, even that, bringing them in, so what I typically see that doesn't work, but is tried most occasions because of necessity, is that you take the folks that are at your company, you try to make them, by the way, they have 40-hour-a-week job, you try to make them subject matter experts on this new thing, which, very little experience maybe in that framework, and then fingers crossed that it works out well, and they don't quit because they're overworked, right? So I don't think those numbers are accurate. And I think in most cases, you're probably going to spend a little bit more than that to get the environment and to get the support that you need to make it compliant.
What do you think, Thad?
So I just want to throw this out there. Please, if you decide to go with a third-party vendor to help you, vet them very carefully before you choose to spend money. I have heard horror stories where vendors have provided an SSP on a system that can never be compliant. So what's the point of that? Why did they spend money on producing an SSP on a system that no way could ever be compliant? So the only thing that I say, please, everyone out there, vet your consultants if you go with a third-party vendor to help you, because you're sometimes you just don't get what you pay for.
So I can give really rough estimates based on the cost of CMMC for defense contractors, which are it's actually a fairly similar requirement set. It's probably plus or minus 10% between this FAR CUI rule and the requirements for defense contractors to protect CUI. So generally, manufacturing companies are the ones that have the highest costs because they have a lot of weird equipment that needs to be on the network, and it needs to be secured and managed. So unfortunately, cybersecurity doesn't scale real well, especially for manufacturing companies. I'd be looking at even if you pull in somebody who has a great track record, they know what they're doing, you're probably looking at between 100 and 200,000 a year for this, for that 50 person, maybe more, right? And then because you kind of need one full-time cybersecurity person, that's a very senior position. Most of those people, they cost 100,000 to 200,000 a year just in labor. That's their salary, let alone buying special hardware and software. So that's kind of the low end is, let's say 200,000 a year. For 500, I'd expect to have to hire an additional 2 to 3 full-time cybersecurity people compared to a typical not terribly secure company. So 600,000, $1 million, right? More potentially per year. Now, the cheap side, so there's an option called an enclave, which in most cases, an enclave can be any type of network, but it's typically a separate network that's separate from your business, which has limited functionality. And most enclaves, they might not be able to email, they might not be able to print, and there's some companies making these available where it might be $20,000, $30,000 a year to run them. Okay, and that's on the extreme low end. Just be very careful who you pull in. If you guys need references, by all means, reach out to Carrie. We've got recommendations for companies that have been known to be successful in preparing their clients. we can also point you to some community resources where you can go out and just talk to the community and get peer-to-peer recommendations. All right, so next discussion point. Will this rule work? I mean, we've seen the DoD try it, right? They tried some stuff. So has this rule incorporated enough lessons learned from what the DoD did? Who wants to go first?
I think one of the biggest lessons learned from the DoD side was that the third-party assessment requirement. I think having that validation, whatever that looks like for the larger scale, it just may not be affordable or accomplishable at the entire federal scale. But having some kind of way to perform a litmus test on the validation requirements is important. That's one of the larger lessons learned. The other lesson learned was self-reporting requirements, right? So again, we talked about that SPRS system, SPRS system that the DoD has, but one of the things that was allowed for so long was that you could report that, yeah, my compliance is horrible, right? I have a score of -10 when I should have a plus 110. Okay, well, thanks for reporting your score. Continue on. You get this contract. Moving on. Right, so that was another lessons learned, in my opinion, right? So that they fix that now, where you have to report this level, or you get nothing. So those are the two big things that probably would be advised. I would advise to bring over, and how we're going to do that. That should be looked at, and I don't really see that in here. So,
Thad, what do you think?
I think that the biggest lessons learned is the fact that they adopted the requirements for FedRAMP. I think anytime that you store CUI in a cloud environment, you have to know that it's secure. It obviously has to meet other requirements because the contractor themselves can't control a lot of what happens in a cloud environment. So I think it's real important, the fact that they adopted the requirement for FedRAMP. I do like the fact that it must be FedRAMP and there's no FedRAMP equivalency, because my personal opinion, I think that's a nightmare, that the DoD Pandora's box that they opened and they haven't figured out how to shut it. I'm hoping that we get away from that. At the same time, I'm hoping we also have a path for cloud service providers to be on the FedRAMP list, but not have to be sponsored by the government, because the government doesn't need that solution. So I'm glad that they went down the path. I'm hoping we can expand the FedRAMP program.
And John?
To an extent, I think this kind of ties back into a lot of people's concern with various recent executive orders. I know one of the more recent executive orders that was executed just in the last week requires the streamlining of the FAR, and another one that was done recently requires that when new regulation is instituted, it needs to have a less than zero cost once everything has been resolved and they've completed their 10-to-1 removal for each one being added. A lot of stuff. So in terms of trying to make back some of the cost that this will incur in cybersecurity for the purchasing, they could point to the money that is acquired from DOJ settlements as a potential income stream to offset that to some extent. I know they've been onboarding a lot of people over at DIBCAC, and what with DoD being one of the primary people pushing this FAR clause, is usually the case with FAR clauses since it's mostly managed by NASA, GSA, and DoD. They could potentially hand these cases over to their people. It says that it operates like a high as assessment. It can be done by the same people. If that's the case, and enough assessments are happening to potentially offset some of the increased cost, that's a lot of assessments, which means hiring more people, which means more assessments. Would they be better off doing C3PAOs and having a third-party assessment? Yes, I think so. And I think that the DoD recognizes that. Maybe they're having a hard time getting everybody else to agree with them. So they'd have to use government employees for now. So I think that's a big part of what will decide whether or not it works.
One of the things I saw from the DoD is they started off with something very similar to this, which is sign saying that you will provide this service, sign saying that you will be cyber secure, and everyone signed. They were like, wow, nobody's complaining. This is great. Apparently cybersecurity is easy. And and then over time, as the DoD has gone through multiple revisions, the stuff that they had put out has had more and more focus on the contractor not just signing the contract as a whole, but providing separate attestations to their compliance on this specific item. And then not just that, but give me more details. Did you individually do each of the requirements? Please sign that you did each of them. Can you get a senior company official to agree that they have looked at this and it really is happening? And that's all a paper trail that is building a case against the companies that don't actually do the work, so that if eventually it is found that they didn't do it, the company cannot say, my procurement person was just signing everything. And do you know how many pages there are of contract stuff? Like, it's more than 1,000. How can you expect me to read it all? Right? We didn't even see that clause. I'm sorry, we were trying, but we didn't even realize that was there. And my contract person's not an IT person, by the way. So they looked at the requirement to have logs and they're like, yeah, we have logs. And they didn't realize that, oh, there's actually a whole lot more to it, because that's not their job. And now the DoD has put in all that extra stuff of you actually need to know what you're doing to sign it. It needs to be senior to sign it, right? So they can be prosecuted. And I don't see that in this FAR clause at all.
No, for the DoD side, a lot of that comes from SPRS. I saw somebody showing, well, they didn't show it to me, but they were describing their input for a level 1 assessment into SPRS. And each individual of the 110 controls, they had to enter how they were meeting the control, and then click a button to go to the next control and enter it and click a button. So they went through 110 pages, and at the end it said sign that everything you have said herein is true. So that's 111 statements that you've just made.
Yeah. Yeah, it's hard to say that you did not see it at this point. All right, so last question before we go to audience questions. So, and I know that we're a little bit past our hour. Do you guys see anything in this proposed rule that you expect will change?
I hope things will change. Whether or not they will, one of the things I really hope changes is actually one I'm stealing from Thad entirely from our conversation beforehand, and that is that I hope that the 8 hours to report an incident changes to confirmed incident instead of confirmed or suspected.
For sure. What do you think, Logan?
I think that what I'd like to see is one change in there. It does talk about NIST 800 Rev 2 being utilized for the protection of non-federal systems. You know, I do think it's valid to have NIST 800 171, and then, you know, qualify it with an additional something, you know, on the record that it's what revision it's going to be with a plan to roll out for the next one. Because, I mean, so if you try to find Rev 2 right now, you'll get a big warning from NIST that, hey, this is no longer applicable. Hadn't been applicable for a year. The DoD has a requirement to do Rev 2 under a memo, because that is what we've been working for so long, and it is a large change. But I think if we're going to put this in place right now, I would like to see that they have a plan to roll the new revision in for Rev 3, because it makes more sense and it's more applicable to technology that we use today.
Great point. And Thad?
Yeah, my biggest expectation is that they'll change it to a confirmed incident versus a suspected incident. The other thing that I honestly hope changes is they actually hold on, I just lost my train of thought. I'll just stick with that for now. Sorry.
Sounds good.
It's my fault for stealing from you.
All right. So first question. And this is all right. So is encrypted CUI still CUI? I want to get encrypted CUI in my non-FedRAMP email and move it by USB to a standalone PC. And I want that standalone PC to be the only device in the CMMC level 2 audit. Now, all right, so first off, this is a CMMC question, not a FAR question. Who wants to go first? Are we allowed to be mean?
I'll go first.
Okay.
But I don't think it's going to answer his question. Because again, this is CMMC, right? This is a CMMC related question because the statement that data is still a form of data in its encrypted form in ciphertext was a statement made by an official within the DoD side. And I believe the way I interpret that is that's a requirement, basically understanding that those controls still apply to the data so that we protect it in an encrypted state where it needs to be protected per the requirements. The way again, it's very not popular, but the way I understand this, the way it is now, is the answer is no, formally from a DoD side because of an official statement. It doesn't really make sense in my personal opinion because there's a lot of other types of data out there in the world in an encrypted form in various states. But again, if we deal with what that CMMC realm is of that data being encrypted, how we store it, how we transmit it, if we still consider it that designation of information, we still have to protect it in the way it's supposed to be protected. And once we remove that designation, there's potential for it being unprotected in an unprotected state in a place where it's not supposed to be.
So I'm gonna give my thought as a CMMC instructor real fast, and then we're going to go on to the next question. I have seen many companies try to pull this one. Okay, I've seen companies say, you know, I'm gonna build the proverbial laptop, and I'm going to stick the laptop in a safe in my basement. And that's going to be my easy mode, right? And I don't have to do any of the security because it's in a safe in my basement. The problem is that as assessors, and every assessor that does CMMC is trained to figure out the data flows, right? How are you getting the data to that laptop? And invariably, one part of it is via some sort of a email system or a cloud system. Get it on the laptop, maybe you're moving USBs, and then the laptop itself needs to be part of that data flow, right? And whenever I see a company try and build this one laptop system, they're generally not scoping correctly. They're not protecting the entire data flow, which means that they're not doing all the requirements. And sticking a laptop in a standalone situation doesn't actually prevent you from being liable to do the requirements, right? And this, you didn't say this, so I'm not pointing this at you, but you know, just pulling the network cord out of a computer doesn't mean that you don't have to patch it anymore. There's nothing in CMMC right here 171 that says you don't have to do it if it's isolated. So what I would recommend is, in your case, if you would like to do that approach, send an email to DoD CIO, right? Go look up the DFARS 252-204-7012 clause. It has an email address, and propose your solution to them and see how they feel about it, right? And if they say that's totally good, you can give that to any assessor and we will say, we're good with it. But generally, That's a sketchy solution that the scoping guide is designed to prevent people from doing. Okay. But by all means, talk to a consultant for more detail. All right, next question. Do you believe that the recent executive order calling for a complete revision of the FAR, this is just in case you guys haven't seen it, the FAR is a very big book of all sorts of acquisition regulations, right? It's like many pages long. And periodically, the United States will consolidate it down to remove all the extra rules that aren't actually that useful or helpful, right? You know, maybe there's a rule that still says a horse and buggy should be used for the procurement of iron, right? By the United States. Maybe let's take that one out. So there's, you know, the Trump administration says, let's streamline this thing. Let's reduce a lot of the unnecessary regulation. How do we think that executive order will affect the FAR CUI rule? Is that going to be one of the things that is deemed not important?
I don't think there's any chance of that personally. And that gets back in what I was talking about the executive orders previously. This one calls for each of the branches to elect a designated person to work with the FAR Council in order to push for whatever it is they believe is important. And as we know, we've had, I'm going to mispronounce names because I'm terrible at it, Stacy Boschinick at the DoD CIO office. She was one of the front runners of the CMMC program. And recently, Katie Arrington recently returned to the DoD as CISO. And she was one of the original front runners of the CMMC program. So with those two people who have kind of hung their hat on this program now for nearly 10 years, I think that there's no chance that they don't consider this to be one of their driving forces. And with the FAR being minimalized in any sense, I don't know how much is going to get done in 180 days, which is the deadline that was given. That gives them quite a few regulations to point to in their other executive order that requires 10 regulations to be removed for each new regulation. Although each regulation that is removed generally requires you to also do a review period, much like when you add one. So they've also said that you can rescind policy statements, interagency agreements, and administrative orders as a means by which to meet that 10-to-1. Because in Trump's first term, he also had a 2-to-1 of the exact same thing in one of his initial executive orders in his first term as well. This one's just a little bit more everything.
That or Logan, thoughts?
Yeah, I've seen more reasonable rules removed, but it really depends on who's leading the charge. I can't say for sure. It's hard to justify it not being put into place because we do have so many contractors out there working with the federal government, and the bad actors that are getting into the systems that they should never have been in is increasing, and it's not getting better. Right, so this is just basic, simple cyber hygiene that can be put into place. It's not cost. It's not. It is. There are some cost prohibitives about it, right? It's going to be expensive, but it's hard to justify why we wouldn't do this.
So I'll just add my 2 cents. This has been a proposed rule since 2016. It took us 9 years to get the proposed rule out. I can't imagine that they rescinded after working on this for 9 years. That's all I'm going to say. It would be heartbreaking.
I'll say what I would like to see, which is not this rule, but all the DoD cybersecurity regulations. What we've seen over the last 8 years is they just stack more and more and more. And now, you know, we're having people attesting to doing AHER 171 and attesting to doing DFARS 7012 and attesting to, allowing access and attesting to doing SCORE here. And now they're going to be attesting to CMMC level 1 and CMMC level 2. And they're just adding. right? And it's all variants of the same thing. And I would love to see all of that consolidated into one rule. I mean, honestly, if they could get all of the CMMC stuff, or even just the DFARS 7012 stuff, right, which is kind of the equivalent of this, consolidated into that FAR rule, that would be an improvement just to reduce the amount of work and double language out there. But who knows? Who knows if we'll see that? Now, we had a comment, I think, when we were talking about, you know, the government asking for crazy deadlines on stuff, and the federal contractors going, well, why aren't you doing stuff too? That just seems like a bunch of cover your rears from both sides, trying to shift responsibility and liability. Yes, for sure, right? We had some conversation about SBU, which you can check in chat. I don't know enough about it. I don't think any of us are going to be able to even respond to that right now. So we're going to hold off on that question. We do have a comment as a sub. It'll be super helpful when the form is flowed down. However, when the form is not flowed down, the onus is still on us to identify that data, which is unmarked, which may actually be CUI and thus be protected. Woo. So I think we, right before this meeting, we were all looking, and the rule actually does require the form to be flowed down. Like, so if you're getting CUI, you have to get the form. And otherwise, I don't think you have a requirement to protect it, but I'm not entirely sure. We'll see what the final rule says. Yeah, I mean, this is, you know, if you've got tons of data that might be CUI, right? Maybe it's all marked FOUO. How are you expected to meet the requirements? Right, we're all going to see. One of my theories of why this FAR CUI rule doesn't have a verification requirement is because they don't want to dead end all those contracts. Right? I mean, they might strongly suspect that cybersecurity is not being performed, but do they want cybersecurity or do they want weapons? Right? They want their bolts, they want their Humvees, right? Those might be more important than whether or not multi-factor authentication is turned on. Both are pretty important, but one might be more important. So I have a theory that might be why verification is not required in this rule that we're looking at here. And maybe in 5 years it will be. Last question. If CUI data is stored or transferred by unsecure means, allowing unauthorized access, then is that a reportable incident? So I've seen this sort of question asked before, most commonly, and bear with me, hopefully I understand. When somebody sends an unencrypted email across the internet and they send CUI in that email, potentially anybody could be seeing it, right? All they have to do is have a listening post in the internet and they could be gathering that CUI. Or maybe you send it via cloud that is not a FedRAMP cloud, and you know, those clouds are just servers in someone else's data center, right? So all those sysadmins could potentially be reading every email you have in that system. So is that a reportable incident? So Logan, Thad, John?
There's a whole bunch of depends in there. Reportable to who, right? So if I'm the receiver, it's reportable. I'm responsible for letting the people that sent it to me know that they sent me unencrypted email. They're responsible for informing their you know, if they've determined that there was a spill, responsible for reporting that up their chain, just like the requirement states. But I'm sure there's many other. That's a simple way to look at it. But there's many other ways you can handle that. But it depends on the situation.
So my best advice is that you have scenarios and you have playbooks, and that you execute your playbooks when something like this happens. So you should have a playbook that says if I've determined that I'm going to receive CUI through email and I don't authorize unencrypted email, then I have a playbook to execute if that happens. And then you follow your playbook.
All right, I see John nodding.
Yeah.
So I have talked to companies that have reported, you know, we put it in the wrong place. We don't know that anybody got access to it, but it was potentially accessed because it was unencrypted. And the people that received that complaint basically said, thanks for letting us know, no action necessary, right? Just try and prevent it from happening again. But that's just anecdotal. You should reach out and look it up yourself. All right, guys. Well, that's it for us. Thank you for attending this webinar. If you're watching this on YouTube or LinkedIn, please subscribe to the CUI YouTube channel for more. And good luck in your compliance journey.